The selected scripture this morning comes from Matthew, the 5th chapter, spanning verses 13 to 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.
I'd like to extend a fine welcome and good morning to everyone here. This morning, we're going to continue with looking at the Sermon on the Mount as delivered by Jesus. Last time we spoke about this, we were saying that Christianity, or the teachings and the religion of Jesus, is going to be countercultural. It's going to be totally different from anything else. For instance, he says, "Blessed are the poor in the spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. Blessed are the merciful." And these are not typically honored or admired by the world. But this is how we're to live, upside down, countercultural. And here we see a picture. This is Cap-des-Rosiers down the Gaspe. And this is the very first lighthouse that was ever built by the government of United Canada. Cap-des-Rosiers saw many, many shipwrecks. It's right at the mouth of the St. Lawrence. And for years, probably for centuries, people were running aground here. People were dying here. And the United Canada finally said, we've got to put up a lighthouse here. The idea that Nathan just read, a tower set on a hill cannot be hidden. And Jesus is going to talk about light. We're going to take a look at light. We're also going to look at salt. It took 5 years to build this lighthouse, and there's a very faint light in there. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. But it's amazing that just a little light, that little spark, can save people's lives. It can save vessels. It can save ships. And Jesus is going to say to us, to those who want to follow him, you've got to be the light. And he also talks a little bit about salt. But what really Jesus is doing is he's moving on to speak of our purpose, our life's purpose. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What am I supposed to do? These are questions that everybody asks. And it's really good when young people ask them, and they tend to ask them, and they're looking to us. And where are they going to get the answers? They look to our culture. But as Jesus has said, we have to live counterculture. Look to Jesus, and he's going to give us different answers than those of the culture. So he gives two pictures, salt and light. And Jesus' point about the salt is if it loses its saltiness, if it can't flavor food, what is it good for? And light, if it is hidden, what good is it? If this light goes out on a night, the lighthouse keeper, today they're automated, but 100 years ago, the lighthouse keeper decides he's not going to climb up those stairs. This is 312 feet tall, huge. He's not going to go up there and light that. What if there's a ship out there and it doesn't see that light? It's going to run aground. So he uses these two examples, salt and light, and on the surface, they're very different. One's a solid, light, what is it? A particle, a wave, what is it? They're very different. But we know that they have opposites. The opposite of salty food would be bland food. The opposite of light would be dark. And there's a tension that is created amongst this. And there's a tension created amongst us as Christians. Because what both of these things do, salt and light, they must penetrate. They must get out there. And we ourselves must get out there and be amongst people. This is what Jesus is saying. And if we're not doing that, we're not fulfilling our purpose. So Christianity is not a demographic. Sometimes we think, oh, you know, they're Christians, and we fill out these surveys and they ask, are you this, are you this, are you this? Basically, marketers want to put you in a certain group, a subcategory. Christianity is not like that. Again, we are countercultural. And from almost the very beginning, this was the way it was. Even if you take a look at the 12 apostles of Jesus, there were differences. You've got Simon the Zealot. He's anti-Roman. And you've got Matthew, who had collaborated with Romans. You take a look at the creation of the church. First day, there are people from all over the Roman Empire and outside of the Roman Empire. Many different languages, ethnic groups, ideas. The Jewish people really set this up for the Christian church because they spread all over the world, the Jewish diaspora. And they still believed and held in one God and Father of us all. And the pagans were fascinated by this idea of the Jewish God. And later Christianity would build on that. And so we see Christianity, the Romans are complaining about it because you find Christians at the lowest levels of society and you find Christians in noble homes. How can this be? Again, it's countercultural. And today, how do you define a Christian? Can you define them by how they look, by what they wear? We can't. Christians are found everywhere throughout the world, every nation, every ethnic group, every language, every occupation, everywhere. Christians are there. So when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, we are going out there and we are making the world a better place. You can take salt and throw it in any type of food and it will enhance the food. I don't want to get too deep into what salt does, but immediately it comes to our mind, yes, we use salt for flavoring our food. And that's what the people felt when Jesus was addressing them as well. So we penetrate, we make things better, we enhance food. And so it has been with Christianity as it spreads throughout the world. Now, it's not always easily spread. As we know, Jesus said at the very end of what we call Beatitudes, you will suffer, you will be persecuted because you are different and you are opposite to the other people. Now, another purpose of salt, we take it and we scatter it on our driveway. We could put it in a pile and it would stay there for a long time, but it's meant to be expendable. And when you scatter it all over the sidewalk or the driveway, it melts the snow. So snow, if it had feelings, would not like salt. It's an enemy to it. It is going to melt it. And we're going to run into people whose hearts are frozen, they're hard. But again, the gospel message can melt their hearts. You think of Saul of Tarsus. He hated these Christians. He hated Stephen. He consented to the death of Stephen. He was there. And yet those words that Stephen spoke, the way in which he died, eventually it melted his heart. Now, there was divine intervention, of course, but there are people like that. We know about bullies. We face them at school. We may face them at work. They're mocking you and laughing you for your faith. But we also know that not everybody present is a bully. Most people are quiet. They're silent. And there might be 2 or 3 or 4 people bullying an individual, and other people don't like it, but they won't want to speak up. Likewise, there may be people who mock the Christians, but there are other people who are going to look at how a Christian lives. They might listen to those words, and it might develop and percolate within them. The Roman apologist, actually was North African, Tertullian, he said, the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. People in his time, Tertullian's day, they were actively being persecuted. People rejoiced when they saw Christians, say, put in an arena and killed by wild animals or by gladiators or whatever happened to go. People like to see the death of Christians. And yet the church was growing. People were looking at that, and they may have seen one of their neighbors. He's a decent guy. He was a good guy. Why did they kill him? Polycarp, we know the martyrdom of him. People are looking, why are they killing this old man? He's no threat to Rome. He was a godly man or a good man, and he's dying because of this. So salt is expendable. We are expendable. Our lives will be used up in the service of God. Jesus, of course, we see the terrible way in which he died, but he came in order to die for us. So salt does enhance the flavor. And if we take a look at the history of Christianity throughout the past 2 millennia, we see how much good the church has done. Just look in North America. You look at 125 or 150 of the earliest universities here, all created by Christians. Red Cross Society, most of the hospitals, we're talking about early hospitals here, the first hospitals certainly in Canada, people who were Christian and wanted to help others. So this is what Christians do. We enhance the life of people round about us. We also preserve. Salt, we know, preserves meat and food, for instance. Where would the early explorers be, or the travelers, without their salted meat? So salt preserves, and we are here to preserve and help society. So Christians may be mocked, people laugh at us, and yet I've heard it said that some of these skeptics, these atheists, they would not want to live in a society that was purely atheistic or agnostic, without the belief of Christ. Take a look at what happened in Russia when they banned it. Take a look at revolutionary France. After the revolutionaries took over the French Revolution, we're going to get rid of, because they hated the Catholic Church and what it has done here, and we were going to ban this and create our own religion. Look at the turmoil, the reign of terror. So you eliminate the influence of Christianity, which is preserving society, which is enhancing society, and what do you get? A world in which we would not wish to live. And yet we have to get out there. We have to embed ourselves. And that is not always pleasant at all. But what the point really that Jesus is saying, salt, how can it be made good again? How can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. And here we could take a look at any spices in our cupboard. If they're no good, if they're not working, if they're not enhancing that food, pitch it out. You don't want it. It's not going to be of any use. So we must continue to be useful to Christ and to his kingdom. But why does he mention this about salt losing its saltiness? We know that salt, sodium chloride, NaCl, it's not going to lose it. Jesus is speaking on a mountain, and I do not know where exactly it was. Perhaps the Dead Sea could be visible. Now, the Dead Sea, we know, is the lowest depression, surface water on this planet. And in Jesus' day, when people wanted salt, they would go down to the Dead Sea and collect the salt there. If you have pure salt, true, it's not going to dissolve. It's not going to lose its saltiness. But if the salt is contaminated, if you are scooping up some grains of sand that have been coated, like a pearl, that grain of sand, but now it's coated with salt, yes, it could lose its saltiness. So this may be what Jesus is alluding to. But if anything is no good, then, and if we're no good to the kingdom, then throw it out, pitch it away. And we certainly don't want to do that. And the early Christians wanted, wherever they went, to spread the message. Now, it's so much easier to keep salt in a container. Don't throw it on your driveway, it's going to melt. Don't throw it in the food, it's going to dissolve. But what good is salt in a salt shaker? What good is that bag of rock salt in your shed? It has to go out. But it was frightening, perhaps, for the early Christians. There they are in Jerusalem. They're hearing the teachings of the apostle, and they're growing. Their numbers are getting bigger and stronger. And it would have been great for them to just stay in Jerusalem and grow there. God had other plans. Persecution comes about with the martyrdom of Stephen. And what happens to the church? It scatters everywhere it goes. But those early Christians, as they traveled, carried the message of Jesus of Nazareth. He is the Christ. He was the Holy One. And they were able to share that. And so you've got one pile of salt, one salt shaker in Jerusalem. It's dispersed. And unlike salt, which evaporates, which is gone, churches are springing up. They're multiplying. The church is growing. So even though we are out there embedding ourselves, Hopefully, we are going to influence other people. They are going to come to Christ, and there will be more and more Christians, more and more followers and disciples of Christ in the world. This is how things work. There's that tension, there's that paradox. And then Jesus switches to, you are the light of the world. So we're like that tower, like that beacon. And when you take a look, if you were to go up in there, now it'd be electric, but 150 years ago, those little lights were pretty small in these lighthouses, in these towers. In fact, if we had the original light in this room and it were nighttime, we couldn't read by it. What is the secret to this lighthouse? How can that light go out miles out into the ocean? Now remember, the ocean is vast and the sky is vast, and yet those sailors could see that small light. The trick is the prism. People take this glass, experts, and they carve it and they work it and they polish the lens, and you've got internal refraction and internal reflection, and out it goes. Jesus says in John, I am the light of the world. But here he says, you are the light of the world. How is this? Well, Jesus is that true light, but as we follow him, as we follow his teachings, he polishes us, he refines us, and so we can be little reflectors of him. In our own universe or solar system, we could say the sun is the light, but at nighttime we get light from the moon. We know that that is reflected from the moon. And if you see a crescent moon, but you actually see the whole circle, you're probably seeing Earth shine, because we have clouds. We're more reflective than the moon is. So the sun will reflect off the Earth. We don't know it, and yet we see it on the moon. Now, the lighthouse keeper, he can't see what's out at sea, especially at night when it's dark and when it's black. All he knows is that that little light up on the tower, on the hill, is lighting, and it's shining out. He has no idea how many sailors are watching that, looking for it, seeking this light. He never has any idea how many ships did not run aground because he kept that light going. And so we are the light as well. And when Jesus says, you are the light of the world, by implication, he's saying that the world doesn't have light. And yet, what do? Sometimes we look at the world and, well, maybe the world has answers for this or for that. We'll see if the world has a philosophy to help me with my life. It doesn't. And sure, philosophies come and go. And if we were to take a look at the ideas that the enlightened ones felt during the French Revolution, we would laugh at them. And even today, we have different philosophies, which I'm sure will go by the wayside. In fact, during the time of the revolution, there were individuals vain enough and proud enough to say, we're going to take this Bible and it's going to be obsolete in 50 years. And here we are, we're still reading the Bible. People around the world are reading the Bible, whereas their philosophies are the ones that have been cast onto the floor, so to speak. So Jesus says, when you do a light, you want everybody in the room to see it. You don't hide it under the bushel, because the light is going to be dark. And we know that this world is dark. We hear the various ideas or political theorists or whatever that they come up with these days, and we just shake our heads. And a good temptation for us would to be, let's just withdraw from the world. Let's just be amongst ourselves. That was tried during the Dark Ages after the fall of Rome. Many people gathered together. You've got walled monasteries. And in one way, it was good because they preserved the scriptures. They copied the scriptures out. But they're not out there shining the light perhaps as much as they could be. But this is our desire. Why do you want to go and have people mocking you and laughing at you and ripping your beliefs apart? And yet, this is necessary. This is what we must do. If all of us here had a little candle, it would be great. We would have a nice glow in the room. But the more people you have in the room with candles, there's not really that great of an increase in the level of light in here. But you take each person with their own little candle, and they go off into a separate dark room, and you're going to have lights all out there. And sometimes we forget it, and we need Jesus to remind us that we are the light of the world. Here we are, maybe not shining great. We're not in the news. We're not famous. And yet people are looking at us. And we may never know the words that we said or how we reacted to a situation that may have influenced that person. But that's what it does. And now we get to the purpose, really our purpose of our life. Jesus says, let your light shine. And this also goes in with let your saltiness be felt, that men may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. So why are we distinctive? Why are we going out amongst the world? Why are we living a countercultural life? The ultimate thing is to praise your Father in heaven. And in the Middle Ages, people laugh, oh, it's so medieval. But the people in the Middle Ages had the right idea. They said the purpose of man is to bring glory to God. We are here to glorify God. We're not here to get a pat on the back, to get our picture taken and be in the newspaper or on TV. We're doing it to glorify God. And sure, people will mock us. They will laugh at us. Some people will, but other people will observe and they will say, what makes that individual different? Now we take a look at, for instance, coaches. Coaches are out there and they can have a bigger impact than they ever realize. They're affirming that player in what they do. They're helping them. They're encouraging them. They're not on the court or on the ice or on the field. They're around, they're in the shadows, but they're encouraging people to do better things, to be better and better people. And they often don't get the glory, and people, they get fired, people angry with them, and they still continue on. And in one way, Christians are coaches, so to speak. That's not what Jesus says. He wants to go with the analogy of the light, but nonetheless, we are lighting the way for other people in our lives. We are the salt and we are the life. Now, what about the application? Where does that come down to us? We know when we do what is right, that we are doing it to please God. But there are cynics out there, and they're going to think we have ulterior motives. They will laugh. They will mock. There is a level of persecution that we're going to feel. Fortunately, in Canada, we don't have to worry about being rounded up and thrown into prison as the early Christians were. But people will resent it. And yet there are others out there on that sea, and we might be the only light that they see, that light of hope, because they're living in a dark world, and we have hope. And when we're going through trials and struggles, we know that God is there. We can feel his presence. They don't have that. They don't have that at all. Not if God is not in their life. We may be the one that guides them away from the shoals. They might not be shipwrecked because of some word we said, some deed we do, some smile that we give them. We never know. But Jesus here reminds us that if you are living a life, if you are the salt and you are enhancing people's lives, if you are a light that is guiding them, you're giving them a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of truth. Ultimately, you are leading them into a safe harbor. That harbor would be the life that Christ has set up, the church, the gathering of the people. We will then be creating other people who are going out there and spreading the light. And sometimes we are surprised. People that would be drawn to Jesus. Some people that are good and happy and friendly, and we think, oh, they would be a good candidate to follow Christ. They will never do it. And yet you get the unlikely people like a Saul of Tarsus, who's angry and bitter, but he's living in the most darkness of all. And that little spark of light could be the one. You might be that light. You might be that spark that draws him to Christ and transforms and changes a life. And I will leave it there, and we will continue in our look at what else Jesus has to say. So it's tough and it's hard for us. It creates tension because sometimes it's uncomfortable to speak to other people. Jesus says you will be persecuted, but that light might be just what the person needs.